In that time were made those things that afterwards were most renowned of all the works of the elves. In the tempering of steel alone of all crafts, the dwarves were never outmatched even by the Noldor, and in the making of mail of linked rings, which was first contrived by the smiths of Belegost, their work had no rival. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are going to be looking at a fascinating question, and one that I anticipate to have some complications in the exploration of it. Were elves or dwarves the better crafters? For related information, please check out the links in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me here today. Let's begin our tale. While this is a simple question to ask, I must admit that in debating this question, even before writing my script for this video, I have discovered some very nuanced conclusions. While I'll try to whittle this down to a simple answer for a simple question, it will require a thorough analysis. When we discuss the works and crafts of elves and dwarves, there is a wide array of crafting inputs, such as materials and substances used, and crafting outputs, weapons, armor, utility-based or holy artifacts, etc. Both elves and dwarves have incredible homes and fortresses that only they could have built with the knowledge of crafting they had as well, so we won't really look at those. Anyway, first, let's look at the elves and some of their greatest crafts, and what materials they used to build them. Most renowned of the works of the elves are in many different forms. The greatest of all elven creations was, of course, Feanor's Silmarils, and then probably the Feanorian Palantiri behind them. After these, we have the 3 elven rings of power, forged through the skill of Celebrimbor with the knowledge given to him by Sauron. We cannot forget that the other rings of power, except the one to rule them all, were also, at least in part, crafted by Celebrimbor alongside Annatar or Sauron. And of course, moving to weapons, we have many instances of some of the greatest weapons in Arda being forged by the elves. Ringil, Anglakil, or Gurthang, Aiglos, Orcrist, Glamdring, Sting, and even Anduril in part, as it was reforged by elves, though Narsil itself was forged by dwarves. Indeed, some of the greatest crafts in all the history of Arda were made by elves, especially by the Noldor, but others as well, sometimes even with the aid of dwarves. Like Celebrimbor and Narvi creating the doors of Durin, and Celebrimbor inlaying the mithril material of Ithilden into the doors. However, we know not what substances or materials were exactly used in the creation of such things. The Silmarils had a hard crystalline shell made of silima, which was also made by Feanor, but we don't know what the base components of this crystalline substance were. I also do not know exactly what material made the Palantiri, other than that material being nigh indestructible. The elven rings too were made of incredible materials, most likely the best that Celebrimbor could gather at that time, as Nenya was said to be made of mithril. It's clear that elves also modified substances or enchanted them, as Glamdring, Orcrist, and Sting were not just plain steel in their completed states, having attunement towards orc kind, as they glowed in orcish presence. There's honestly a lot of mystery surrounding the works of the elves, and it is clear that they understood the art of crafting differently, and perhaps even better than any other race, as many of them learned directly from the Valar and Maiar themselves. But let's switch to the dwarves now and see how hard answering this question really is. The dwarves, in and out of Middle-earth, are simply known as the crafters, as is their archetype. I would even venture to say that a higher percentage of the dwarven population in Middle-earth were crafters than the percentage of elven crafters. Their creator Aule, who they called Mahal, was the craftsman of the Valar, and it is said, ere the dwarves were created, Aule wanted learners whom he could teach his lore and crafts to. It is pretty much in their blood to be crafters, and in Middle-earth the dwarves earned quite a reputation of being such. Some of their best smiths, like Telkar, built things such as Engcrist, the knife that cut the Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, the dragon helm of Dorloman, and Narsil. Other dwarves of the First Age built great daunting masks that could even withstand dragon fire, and other dwarves built the Nauglamir necklace to house the Silmaril, even putting the two together. Other weapons would be made by dwarves throughout the ages as well, of course, like Azakal's knife that cut Glaurung the dragon, Durin's axe, which was lost in Moria, and the red axe of Dane Ironfoot. While some of the secrets in dwarvish crafting would be lost over the ages, especially concerning metalwork and the making of mail and weapons, they would become better miners, excavators, and craftsmen of mountain halls in later days. It seems that dwarves, especially those in the Elder Days, were unmatched in the working of steel and ordinary metal. The crafter Narvi would aid Celebrimbor in creating the Doors of Durin, which had Ithildin, which could be seen under moon and stars, as it was inlaid with mithril. Mithril, of course, was mostly used and forged into great works by the dwarves, more than any other race, as we see with Bilbo's mithril mail. Most mithril in Middle-earth came from the dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm, of course, so it makes sense that, like steel, dwarves could best work mithril. And speaking of Ithildin, we must not forget the moon runes on Thror's map of Erebor, also forged by dwarves who had secrets in crafting of their own, perhaps called dwarf magic by some. They would even shape the Arkenstone. Even in later days, the dwarves would craft a gate of mithril and steel for Minas Tirith, and Gimli would put Galadriel's hair into crystal as an heirloom of his house, symbolizing the friendship between dwarves and elves. And so, having explored the crafts of both elves and dwarves, we have ourselves quite a conundrum. Both elves and dwarves created mighty and incomparable crafts, further fueling the competitive and antagonistic nature between the two races, I think. Yet, who were the superior crafters? If I had to answer the question plainly, I would say elves were the overall superior crafters, the Noldor in particular. I would make this claim as the dwarves never created something equal to the Silmarils or Palantiri, nor had the potential to do so, I believe, as the elves learned directly from the Valar and Maiar, like Aule and Sauron themselves, who were perhaps the first and second greatest craftsmen in Tolkien's writings. However, there are a few caveats to my claim here. While elves could build mightier works and perhaps even better weapons with the right materials and enchantments, all of these things and crafters were rare indeed. If we were outfitting a small group of adventurers, like the elves of Imladris and Lothlorien did with the Fellowship of the Ring, there could potentially be enough material to create some good weapons and armor for each of them. But if one was outfitting a large army of hundreds or thousands, I think the dwarves win there, as they could create many more items using ordinary substances like steel, and they could do it faster, as I believe there were generally more high-quality crafters among dwarves than the greatest and unmatched crafters among the elves, who were scarce in the history of Arda at large. This presents the second caveat. Dwarves could do far more with ordinary steel than elves could, as they were said to be unmatched in the working of steel and the creation of mail. If given enough mithril, perhaps dwarves would make better weapons and armor than anything the elves could make. Yet mithril was rare, and we do not see any mithril-based weapons in the canon. Indeed, this is a very difficult question, but I believe this is my answer. While elves were better crafters overall, the best among them were very rare and needed extraordinary materials and enchantments to make better items than the more abundant dwarven crafters, who could make high-quality items out of plain steel, even if such things paled in comparison to the greatest crafts of elves and dwarves alike. Elves also have such a wide array of crafted artifacts to choose from the Silmarils to Palantiri to Rings of Power to weapons. Even at the top level of craftsmen from both races, Feanor for the elves and perhaps Telkar for the dwarves, Feanor outmatched him overall, even if Telkar built mighty artifacts, armor, and weapons in his own right. Of course, it's still worth mentioning that the works of the dwarves are incredible, and both elves and dwarves were far better crafters than the race of men or any other kindred could ever hope to be. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you all think in the comments below. Do you agree with my assessment, or do you have other thoughts that I did not consider? Let me know. And so we come to the end of our tale. From this discussion of the crafts of elves and dwarves, I do have an appreciation of both cultures and their works, and it's important to regard the respect many of them did have, even if begrudgingly, for each other. Every culture can certainly bring something new and valuable to bear. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this Middle-earth Explained video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on this topic? Let me know in the comments below. I've taken a lot of time to reflect and think on this subject over the last week, and while it was really difficult to answer, it was a super fascinating inner dialogue to consider. Both elves and dwarves create quite impressive things in the Legendarium indeed. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian de la Tour, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Bootna, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrolik, Kuzan, Brandon Glidden, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, and Dorwin Gray. Thank you all so much, and thanks to all of our patrons and YouTube members. The support means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a video on the epic character history of Merry Brandybuck, Master of Buckland. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.